Hi. Okay, this is the start of Chapter 12, The Worlds of the 15th Century, Section 1, The Shapes of Human Communities. Chapter 12 is structured differently than most of the other textbook chapters. Instead of dealing with one region or one theme, this chapter provides an overview of various world history processes occurring simultaneously in different parts of the world. And a chapter organized like this one can build chronological reasoning skills because practically all of the processes are occurring in the relatively narrow window of the 15th century. And this opening section touches on long-lasting gathering and hunting societies such as the native inhabitants of Australia, the small village societies like the Igbo of West Africa, and even the pastoral societies like the Turkic peoples of Central Asia. And these descriptions provide a chance to review some of the different patterns of settlement that were described in the first 6 weeks of class. You might, remember the material better when the information is presented at different times in a different context. And sections like this one serve to reinforce previous knowledge that provides a foundation for this course, essentially. And so this chapter deals with a breadth of different issues of the 15th century and creates a bridge to the modern era. Okay, this first image I think is fantastic. Who are the people in this image? Where are they? This actually shows Christopher Columbus accompanied by Spanish troops here's Christopher Columbus accompanied by Spanish troops, and they're meeting Tyno Indians, the natives of the island of Hispaniola, which is present-day Haiti. In the background, you can see more Spanish troops as they disembark from one of the Spanish ships, and the silhouettes of a few Indians fleeing, maybe, at the sight of the Spaniards can be detected in the upper right-hand corner. So how did the artist depict the Spaniards? And in contrast, how did he portray the Indians? Well, Columbus stands outright. His position expresses confidence, determination. He's a force to be reckoned with. He's holding a spear, and not in a pose of attack or defense, but as if maybe staking a claim on the land. He, of course, is fashionably dressed, and his soldiers are wearing full body armor and helmets, and also carrying long muskets. And across from them stand these Tyno Indians here. Some look as if they're leaning backwards, or others bend their knees in a gesture of deference, and maybe even apprehension, as it looks like they're offering Columbus valuable objects, or what they might consider valuable. Except for, minimal loin coverings, they don't have much clothing on. And what is the significance of this encounter? Well, proved devastating for the Tyno Indians, the first native peoples of the Americas to suffer from the Spaniards' spread of diseases and enslavement of Indians in their quest for gold and other valuable resources. And the Spanish and other explorers and settlers, as they spread into the Americas, that eviscerated the local populations and cultures, dramatically accelerated social, political, and economic changes, and not only in the Americas, but in Europe, Africa, and Asia as well. And this individual voyage and single encounter marks a dramatic turning point in world history, as we will really get into in this chapter. Okay. Columbus's legacy has been the subject of much debate. His reputation as a heroic discoverer has been challenged. There's been an emphasis placed on the history of death and slavery, racism, and even exploitation that followed from his voyage. And this is a reminder that the past can be as unpredictable as the future. And even though Columbus's voyage is arguably the most important single event of the 15th century, many other developments were occurring across the globe at the same time. And this chapter's purpose is to review the human story up to the 16th century and establish a baseline against which to measure the transformations of the period 1500 to 2000. So this is a very important chapter. Okay, 1500, the world still had all types of societies, from bands of gatherers and hunters to empires, but the balance between them was different from what it had been in 500. So let's start with the Paleolithic persistence, Australia and North America. Gathering and hunting societies, which are Paleolithic peoples, still existed throughout all of Australia, much of Siberia, the Arctic coastlands, and parts of Africa and the Americas. And they changed over time as they interacted more and more with their neighbors. These gatherers and hunters have a story as well. While non-literate and non-urban, these societies did change over time. We just don't have many written records of it. There's a manipulation of the environment and trade. In Australia, the Aboriginal peoples manipulated the environment, engaged in relatively long-distance trade networks, indicating a certain degree of complexity. And complexity, or affluent gatherers and hunters, even existed in the Northwest. There was an abundance of food sources that allowed for permanent settlements of large houses, even social stratification and complexity, and extensive food storages. Now, let's look at some examples of Australian hunters and gatherers. There are approximately 250 separate groups. They had assimilated outside technologies and ideas. For example, the outrigger canoes, fish hooks, netting techniques, artistic styles, rituals, and even mythological concepts. They had not adopted agriculture. They did manipulate their environment through fire stick farming. They engaged in or exchanged goods over hundreds of miles, and they developed sophisticated sculpture and even rock painting. Now, the northwest coast of North America developed very differently. The abundant environment allowed a development of a complex gathering and hunting culture. They actually had permanent settlements, economic specialization, hierarchies that sometimes included slavery, chiefdoms, and food storages. But elsewhere, farming had advanced and absorbed those Paleolithic lands. Okay, let's talk about the agricultural village societies of the Igbo and the Iroquois. Predominated in much of North America and parts of the Amazon River Basin, Southeast Asia, and Africa south of the equator. And these societies mostly avoided oppressive authority, class inequalities, and even seclusion of women, typical of other civilizations. So they had this egalitarian kinship society without state systems. These societies had histories and a certain degree of social and economic sophistication, but did not have, per se, larger political systems. Instead, they relied on kinship. And let's start with the first example in the forested region in present-day South or southern Nigeria. By the 15th century, Yoruba and Benin people had begun to develop small states and urban centers. The Igbo peoples developed a dense population and trade, but purposefully rejected kingship and state building. They relied on title societies, women's associations, and hereditary ritual experts to create a stateless society. So the Igbo had no king, but they did have trade. Now, the West African Igbo did not have kings or a state like their neighbors, but they did engage in trade with nearby kingdoms. The Yoruba, the Bini, and the Igbo peoples traded among themselves in even beyond that with their neighbors. The region shared a common artistic traditions, and they all shifted from what began as matrilineal systems to patrilineal systems. And what is now central New York State, agricultural village societies underwent a substantial change in the centuries before 1500. Iroquois speakers became fully agricultural based on maize and beans by around 1300. And as population grew, there was an emergence of distinct peoples. The rise of warfare as key to male prestige was important. And many believe perhaps since women did the farming, the males were no longer needed for getting food, and so thus warfare is what led to the main factor of male prestige. Warfare triggered the creation of the Iroquois Confederation. The Great Law of the Five Nations is now what is basically central New York State. It develops in a rather complex manner. With a major agricultural shift, the Iroquois-speaking people became more productive. Populations grew. The growing populations created conflict and frequent warfare, until sometime in the 15th century when an alliance was formed and a truce established. This great law of peace put an end to the bloodshed and allowed the development of limited government, social equality, and even some personal freedoms. Let's see. Okay. The pastoral peoples, Central Asia, and West Africa. The Turkic warrior Timur or Tamerlane tried to restore the Mongol Empire about 1400. His army devastated Russia and Persia and India. He died about 1405 while preparing an invasion of China. His successors kept control of the area between Persia and Afghanistan for about a century. This was Samarkand. And his conquest was the last great military success of the Central Asian nomads. Tamerlane was actually probably the last great Central Asian leader of warrior nomads. Like I said, they plundered parts of Russia, Persia, and India, but died before invading China. His descendants maintained control of an important Central Asian region, yet in the coming centuries, most of the Turkic nomads would face imperial expansion from Russia and China. Samarkand was probably the most important city of Timur's descendants. Here, the Persian and Turkic cultures blended and developed a very sophisticated elite culture. In the following centuries, like I mentioned, the steppe nomads' homeland completely swallowed up by the expanding Russian and Chinese empires. And African pastoralists, however, remained independent from established empires for several centuries longer, until the late 19th century, which we'll learn about as the scramble for Africa. And let's look at the example of the Fulbe, which is West Africa's largest pastoral society. There's a gradual eastward migration after about 1000. They usually lived in small communities among agriculturalists. They gradually adopted Islam, and some moved to towns and became noted religious leaders. But there was a series of jihads in the 18th and 19th centuries that created new states ruled by the Fulbe. These people were from the upper reaches of the Senegal River. They were nomadic cattle herders. Initially, they traveled and settled among some societies. They paid rent to some of these settled communities for grazing rights. They held the farmers' way of life in contempt, actually. But later, as they more and more converted to Islam and the series of jihads, some established their own states and even adopted or became noted religious leaders. And that is the end of section 1. I'll see you when we cover section 2, civilizations of the 15th century, as we compare China and Europe.